With that very appropriate quote in mind, consider a job interview where you'll present, deliberately or otherwise, 3 things: personality, ambition, and skill. With good responses to the interviewer's questions, you'll be able to tell someone about the first 2, but for the third, you'll have to show them a portfolio. And in this video, we're going to talk about the 5 things that portfolio should include. To begin, your drawings and graphics need to be planted in some good ground, so to speak, and that ground is a subtle, organized, and interesting layout. The layout is a portfolio's frame, and a frame lacking subtlety will unnecessarily draw attention to itself and add clutter. So subtle just means well organized, properly aligned, and deliberately simple. So avoid the random, ambiguous elements, the cluttered borders and frames, the misaligned windows, the Photoshop filtered and feathered edge background decorations. Just keep things simple. Subtlety should even be sought in your font choices. The sans serif fonts that tend to prevail in architectural graphics are a really good idea for a portfolio. Now, admittedly, subtle can start to look a little bit static, so remember to add features that will keep it interesting at the same time. Once you've established your crucial layout elements, you can add color, for example, to categorize your content. And then while maintaining tight alignment and organization, add some variation in scale to establish different levels of emphasis and hierarchy. I recommend an 11:17 or tabloid format, as it's otherwise known, because it's the largest convenient and portable size for a printed portfolio, should you want to pass that across the desk in an interview. It's also a pretty close match to a very typical 1080p or HD screen size if you're building an online portfolio or sending it off as a PDF. Also consider incorporating different framing strategies, like isolating elements from their background and populating the negative space around them. Keep the descriptions brief and maintain focus on the visual elements. Of course, it's good to look at examples, so here are a few sources of layout inspiration that will help you to gain greater familiarity with the looks that tend to prevail in the industry. One thing to be aware of, though, when looking at architecture websites and magazines, is that they can give a misleading impression about the importance of presentation graphics. So, as we move on to the second point and begin talking about the actual content of a portfolio, it's important to keep statistics like this in mind. You'll see similar numbers from many different sources, and they all point to the same important fact, that most of an architecture firm's time is spent on construction documents or working drawings. And it's important that you demonstrate your understanding of this very crucial way of communicating viable design ideas. Consider including at least one full working drawing sheet on a title block to show that you've got a feel for how they should be arranged. And then crop and zoom other examples of your best work to provide a better view of assemblies and annotations. Now, obviously, you want to include your most detailed, accurate, industry-compliant work, but it's also really important to make sure that it's your most graphically clear work. This is particularly important in a job interview where your portfolio might only get a quick glance. Membranes and flashing, for example, might not get noticed, but graphic elements like scale, line weights, and the size of annotation elements definitely will. To illustrate that point, we'll look at a couple of parapet details. Now, the line work representing the assemblies is identical in each of these, but the graphic refinement of the drawing on the right will leave the interviewer with a much better impression of one's ability to generate good working drawings. On to the third point now, the content that lies at the other end of the spectrum, the presentation graphics. Start with examples derived from working drawings. This will show that you can use your graphic skills to support actual projects and not just to make isolated architectural artwork. Presentation plans, elevations, and sections are all really good examples of this, and you can also include some schematic illustrations and massing diagrams. Well-crafted renderings are very appealing, of course, but don't include too many. Interviewers are often skeptical of these because, as established in the points about working drawings, they just don't represent a significant portion of the work that most people are hired to do in an office. If you feel like your skills lean a bit too heavily towards either working drawings or presentation graphics, you can bridge the gap by including our fourth point, 3D sections and details. By exposing the inner parts of a building, you'll be able to demonstrate more technical knowledge than a typical rendering shows, and you'll also be able to show your ability to adapt traditional 2D information for a broader, less technically inclined audience. The fifth and final point is actually an optional one. This is not something that will be expected in your portfolio, so include it only if you feel it's a strength. Hand drawing is still very relevant. It represents the quickest, most direct way to capture an idea, and it's also very useful in a meeting with a client or a consultant when you want to provide some quick visuals without getting distracted by a device. Plus, early hand-drawn versions of your final work create a nice chronicle or a record of your progress through a project. These drawings can be scanned and modified in programs like Photoshop and Illustrator for a bit of extra refinement. Just a few final points to add to the composition. Remember, your portfolio will gain more legitimacy in the eyes of the interviewer if you connect your images to practical technical content. For example, instead of an isolated rendering with a somewhat randomly selected vantage point, include one with a camera view that clarifies the orientation of a related technical image. And one final note to conclude, the right dose of each of these components will depend on the kind of jobs you're applying for. Include more working drawings for technical production-related jobs, and perhaps add more presentation graphics for design-related jobs. Still maintaining, of course, a good, strong connection to working drawings. All right, thanks for watching. Please provide a reaction to this video in the comments below, and please subscribe for updates on upcoming videos.